Welcome back, podcast fans. I'm your host, Annette Hines, and this is Parenting Impossible. And I'm here today with Katherine McLaughlin from Elevatus. So I do want to warn you that this is a difficult subject for some people, maybe triggering. We are going to talk about sexuality and something that I find in my 30 years of practice is very difficult for parents and caregivers and self-advocates, everybody. It's taboo. And I mean, hey, let's face it, we have trouble talking to our, non-disabled children about these sorts of things. So why would this be any different? All right, Katherine, we're off and running on this very difficult topic of adult sexuality, whether someone has a disability or not. Sexuality plays into our lives. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background? We'd love to know more about you.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for having me. So I have been a sexuality educator and trainer for really over 30 years. And early on in my career, I started to get requests from developmental disability agencies, special educators saying, we really need help addressing this topic.
Right.
And so that happened. And at the same time, I ended up having an accident and becoming a wheelchair user. And so
Wow.
all of a sudden, I'm in this field of sexuality and healthy relationships. Then I have this experience where I was a walking person, and then now I use a wheelchair. And,
Wow.
and I started to notice how people were treating me really differently than they did before. And it was because of the disability. And I got interested in disability awareness, and then sexuality was a big part of that as well. And so that's kind of where it all began.
Wow. Okay. So why is this such a difficult topic for all of us? Why is it so painful to have these conversations or to work on, you know, training people? And let's just open it up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when I ask parents that same question, what makes it difficult? Their responses are things like, no one talked to me, so I have no good role models. Like, what does a healthy, normal conversation about this sound like? Because we either don't talk about it or we joke about it. So what does it even sound like?
Yeah.
They say it's difficult because sometimes they don't see their child as a sexual person.
Right.
Um, especially when they're growing up. And so it can be hard to see them as an adult with sexual needs and desires and all of that. So it can be difficult. They also say, they're not sure how much to cover, when to start, the
Yeah.
age, all of those things that are sort of like, how do I do this? And so those tend to be the ones, and just the message that they all received growing up, which was, and I usually do a poll during my trainings on Zoom, the number one response is don't talk about it.
Right.
So we're taught to not talk about it and just, put your head in the sand and pretend, so that we've just been taught this. So it's really hard to unlearn those messages and say, it's okay to talk about this. And
Right.
I want to talk about this because I want my child to come to me and not go to the internet to learn about this.
Sure.
So yeah, it's difficult, but it's so doable. And it does. And I think there's some myths too that are a reason why it's difficult. So first of all, there's this sort of idea that there's the one talk, and you have to
Yeah.
sit down and it's really awkward. But really, talking about sexuality, there's lots of little talks, little conversations you have. When you're watching a movie, you can talk about the relationship, all kinds of ways to talk about it where it doesn't have to be this awkward, talk.
Right.
So that's a myth that it's a one-time, check it off your list, all set.
Yeah.
Um, and the other myths are, and a lot of parents feel this way. They worry that if they talk about it, it'll give them ideas.
Yeah.
So let's just not talk about it. And we know from research that just is not true. Parent-child communication has very positive health outcomes. So really talking to your kid gives them knowledge, and knowledge is power. And knowledge, it gives them the information they need to make choices that are right for them. And when they don't have information, then they're going to make different choices, right? If they have no idea how babies are made, they may not take precautions or so yeah, it really not, I always say knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Protection.
And following up on that, we haven't really even scratched the surface of the numbers of people with disabilities who have been subject to unwanted touching, assaults,
Sure.
relationships that are unhealthy.
Sure.
And so because it's so hard to get a grasp on that, the numbers that we do know are way too high
Absolutely.
for people who are already vulnerable in so many ways because they rely on others, community, et cetera, to help, get through their day. So how can we use this knowledge is power theme to curb the tide on this issue, this problem?
Yeah. Well, I think first off is bodily autonomy. Does your child believe that their body is their own and they get to decide what's right for them? And if they don't, a lot of the knowledge isn't going to make a difference. So really that strong belief, like I'm in charge of my life and I get to decide what is right for me. And if I don't want to hug Aunt Doris, I don't have to hug Aunt Doris. Because what happens, and you probably know this scenario, a young child or a grown-up says, I don't feel comfortable hugging Aunt Doris. And the parent says, do you want to hurt their feelings? So what we're teaching is what you feel doesn't matter. If you're uncomfortable, it doesn't matter. You got to make sure you take care of everybody else's feelings. And so little things like that and opportunities to make choices and decisions. And a lot of self-advocates say to me that when they talk to their parents, they say, let me make a mistake. That's how you live. That's how you grow. And it's scary, right?
Yes.
Really scary to let our kids let them go free and make their own decisions. And what if they, turn out poorly? And but they say, I want to learn. That's part of being, a full human being is having that autonomy, making my own decisions, learning from them, growing from them. So I think that's an important point is that we give people practice in areas that aren't as scary.
Yeah.
What do you want to wear today? Do you want to hug Aunt Doris? No. Okay. How would you like to say goodbye to her? Lots of opportunity to be in charge of their bodies and their life so that when they get older and they're in relationships, that they've had practice. And
that just makes so much sense, Katherine. It really does. But I feel like all goosebumpy and scared, and my hair is standing up because I just get afraid just thinking about all of this. And
no, I know.
And I know I'm not alone.
You are not alone. Yeah. And like you mentioned, the rates of sexual abuse, that someone with an intellectual developmental disability is 7 times more likely to be abused than someone without. And a woman with intellectual developmental disabilities is 12 times more likely. So that, like you said, way too high. And so starting with bodily autonomy and then also different kinds of relationships and how you touch in those different kinds of relationships too. That even though it's, we think of sexual abuse prevention as really talking about the actual act of abuse, but a lot of it is just understanding different relationships, public and private topics. To not talk with a stranger about private things, because that shows that you kind of lack some boundaries. It could potentially be taken advantage of when you display those. So I think there's a lot of ways to teach sexual abuse prevention skills without even talking about abuse. But we also have to talk about that too.
When you are working with folks on these issues, are you talking to the individuals themselves and their care providers? Do you have trainings for group homes, residential staff, or, day
Yeah.
programs, et cetera?
Yeah, so my work is, well, for years, I did a lot of direct education with individuals with disabilities. I'd lead classes with them. I also led parent workshops. So how do you talk to your own children about sexuality and healthy relationships? And then I also trained staff too. So how do you address it as a support provider in a, effective, respectful, trauma-informed way? And so those three populations, but I'm also in the position now of training others to lead classes and parent workshops and training. So I'm a little more removed now, and I get to teach all these really invested, excited about the topic people, which is really fun for my last chapter of life,
Yeah.
And then I also train self-advocates to be sexuality educators and a team, a professional self-advocate team, and they teach classes. So someone goes into a class and they have a disability and they see one of the instructors has a disability.
Yeah.
And that's really powerful. It shows that you can be a teacher if you want. That people with disabilities are part of the solution. We don't just have to fix it for them. They're part of this. They're teaching as well. So I also train them to be sexuality educators.
That's amazing and very person-centered.
Mhm.
So excited to hear that. Because every person is going to have a different approach, a different feeling about relationships. It's very individualized, and there's no one way fits all. And unfortunately, when you live institutionally with a lot of supports, people tend to put their own stuff on you, and or sometimes they go too far in the other direction of anything is okay,
Right. Right. Sure. Sure. Yeah. And I think, you bring up a good point. When I'm working with professionals, I do an activity around your values, and it's okay to have values. All of us do. It's fine. But when we're in a professional role, we have to set those aside. And one of the quotes someone gave me at a training was, you can be a vegetarian and work at McDonald's. So you can, right? I mean, you can. It might be difficult, but you're doing your job and you're selling hamburgers. But if you said, eating meat isn't good for your health or the environment or whatever, you'd lose your job.
Right.
And so it's the same kind of thing when we're supporting people, that we have to set our values aside. It's okay to have them. And really part of the activity is for them to be aware of what their values are, so that they don't just kind of pop out of their mouth when they're not. But for parents, that's your job, right? Is to share values. That's what we're supposed to do. But as a professional, we tend to kind of act like parents sometimes in our professional roles. And
Way too much,
right.
For sure.
Yes.
Oh, so one thing that I wanted to ask you about is that, and I'm a little bit of an older generation, but today sexuality is very fluid. And, it's a different world than when I was becoming of age and talking about these things. And I didn't talk about this stuff with my mother either. So, how does your training deal with or address the fact that sexuality is very fluid these days? Things are just different.
Right. Yeah, there's a great clip from Comedy Central where a father is trying to talk to his son who's, in high school, maybe in health class, and he's trying to talk to him, and they're just like speaking different languages. So it's sort of what you're saying, is that kind of awkwardness. And I always say, well, be open as an older person, like listen, learn, and young people to be patient. We were brought up a certain way, and so we've got to unlearn that and realize that there's a lot of variety in sexuality, either gender identity or sexual orientation. There's lots of different ways that people identify. And knowing that is is important, whether it's about us or a friend or a coworker, knowing that there's a variety of ways of identifying helps us in our society as well.
Let's dig in a little bit to what a training might look like. Let's say that you're going into a residential setting with your self-advocate team, somebody who's co-training with you. What topics do you touch on? You've mentioned, a few, but what does that training look like?
Yeah, well, I have a curriculum that I wrote with self-advocates. So that when I first started doing this work, there weren't a lot of materials. There was the Circles program, you may have heard of it. There was Life Horizons, which was like a 1970s slideshow, So I thought, okay, I'm going to start teaching, create some materials and teach these topics. And I went to a group of self-advocates in Vermont, Green Mountain self-advocates, and said, I'm going to create this curriculum. And they said, hold on, nothing about us without us.
Right.
We want to be part of it, creating these materials, and we also want to be teachers. So that was a big aha moment for me. So I have which I had the support of the self-advocates, a 22 lesson curriculum. So it's lots of lessons, and the first 7 are much more just kind of foundation, like relationships, different types, public and private, friendships, decision-making, communication, sort of those that anyone can use. And then it moves more into relationship skills. How do you find a partner? How do you communicate with your partner? How do you fight when you argue? How does decisions in your relationships, how does that impact the path you take? And so a lot about relationships. And then we move into body parts and how to take care of them, and sexual feelings, and sexual acts, and how do you protect yourself if you don't want to be pregnant, or if you, against sexually transmitted infections. So it's a lot of topics, but sometimes I'll do maybe an 8-session series. So we may start off with more of that foundation kinds of stuff, and then move into how do you meet a partner? How do you move from a friend to a partner or sweetheart or significant other? And those skills, because we don't really know, a lot of people aren't taught how to do that, right? How do you court someone?
Yeah.
And that tends to be what a lot of people want to talk about is, I want friends or I want a partner. And how do I get one?
Right.
And I'm lonely, and I want connection and closeness. And that's part of our sexuality as well, is feeling connected and feel like we belong. And so that tends to be what people are interested in, is relationships. And sometimes, you hear the word sexuality and we see the first 3 letters, sex, and we go, ugh, right? But really, a lot of it is about relationships and relationship skills. So really, you could change it to relationship education, and you wouldn't get that same kind of, even though that would be part of it, it just isn't front and center. But if people feel like, oh, I just can't do this, you could think of it as, I'm teaching about relationships. And there's lots of different kinds of relationships. So how do I help my child have friends? How do I help them maintain those friendships? Oh, they want a partner. Okay, how do I do? Then I need to talk more about, well, what do they want to do with their partner? Sometimes people want to just be romantic and not do sexual things. So what do they want? And what do they need to learn in order to have a healthy relationship, whatever kind of relationship it is?
Yeah. And earlier you mentioned, mom, dad, please let me just make a mistake. Let me make my mistakes. And so we call that the dignity of risk.
Yes.
Talk about that a lot on this podcast. And I have a friend who's an attorney and also a sibling, who says, so-and-so, his sister, like, she has the same right as everybody else to walk out of her house and get robbed in the street. Right. It's shocking. Nobody wants to hear that. Everybody's like, oh, what do you mean? But fear of being robbed should not keep somebody behind closed doors for the rest of their lives. That's basically the dignity of risk. And if she's cool with taking the chance of going out, then we all should be too.
Yeah.
But also not outrageously, like probably not 3 o'clock in the morning, walking around the neighborhood if the neighborhood's dangerous. I mean, things
Sure.
like that. So there are, and this is what I hear from families, right? There are things that are life changers if they go wrong. So there's pregnancy, you mentioned that. There's sexually transmitted diseases. There's a relationship that's going to make my child feel bad.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't want them to ever hurt. I don't want them to ever be sad. I don't want, the world has rejected them already. I don't want them to be rejected by another person. There's a
Yeah.
lot of that, right?
Yes.
So how do we move past that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question because it's scary. It's really scary. And I think too, with the another thing that self-advocates have said is when you restrict me or try to control me, I'm going to work around you.
Mm,
And I know that's hard to hear, but it can really backfire if we're so worried that we don't want them to do anything. And right, it can backfire. And self-advocates say when they sneak around a person, whether it's a family member or a staff person says you can't
right.
date that person, they say they're more risky when they do that. And
Mhm.
if something bad happens, they don't feel that they can come back to the person to talk about it.
That's a fair point. We
Yeah,
always want people to feel safe talking to their team. We call that our circle of care.
right.
Um, there's got to be comfort and safety there.
Right. And I get the fear, and the wanting to protect and restrict. And um, it's really scary to let it go, but really thinking about, don't I want to be part of these conversations?
Mhm.
Rather than they're out there on their own with no information. Yeah. And so I think sometimes as a culture, we withhold information as a way to control.
Yeah.
Um, And we can't do that because that's making people vulnerable. So if I don't say, did you know that if you go out at 3 in the morning, it's more risky, there is a higher chance that you could get robbed.
Mhm.
If I don't say that, then they're out at 3 in the morning, right? So it's not controlling, it's giving information. So then they can make the choice.
Yeah.
Gosh, maybe I won't go out at 3 in the morning since it's so risky and it's dark and there's not a lot of people around and it's kind of scary. Um, but I mean, people with disabilities are really good decision makers.
Right.
Uh, and we just have to give them the information and do some pros and cons.
Mhm.
If you decide to go out at 3 in the morning, what are some things that positive
Mhm.
could happen? Oh, it'd be nice and quiet. I could see the stars. What are some negative things that could happen? Okay, what if you decided to go out at 6 in the evening instead, and it's lighter in the summer? What would be good about that? Oh, I would feel safer, right? So we're just helping them make those decisions themselves, and then they can come to you if it didn't go well
Right.
and
Right.
reflect. But I'm not saying that's easy.
No. No, I get that. We all get that.
Yes.
Um, what about people who are more profoundly impacted by their disabilities? I know people ask these questions all the time. So and so is nonverbal, they have a intellectual disability, they're functioning at such a low level, all things I hate to talk about for sure, but that's the reality for some
Sure.
families.
Yep.
Would have been for me. My daughter Elizabeth was on the very profound end of the continuum for her.
Sure.
So is your curriculum, is it, does it take that into consideration? Are you able to adapt it for
Yes.
people who do have a lower level of intellectual capacity to be able to
Yep.
understand concepts?
Yeah, yeah. So the original curriculum is the 22 lessons. And then I recently worked with a special educator, and she and I adapted the lessons to use more graphics, simplified concepts, give more time for the content, to process the content. So we have a new curriculum that's been adapted. I worked with someone who was in the field of alternative communication, and they did some communication boards and cards to go along with the curriculum as well. So in my role, when I first started doing this work, no one was getting this information, right? So I worked on this curriculum with 3 Mountain South advocates. And so then we're reaching some people with disabilities, right? But not everybody. And then the next, someone's at a training and they go, what about people who are non-speaking? All right, okay. So then we do a project and we get that. And then someone says, well, what about people with more profound disabilities? And so we're working on that. And I think for people with more severe disabilities, a lot of it has to be individualized. Because, like as your daughter, teaching your daughter, you knew or know how to do that, right? You got a sense of, I'm going to teach about going to the dentist, and this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to model something, so there's going to be, the parents know how to teach their kids. They know them best. So sometimes what I would love is for parents to feel supported, that they can have those conversations too.
Yeah.
As well as getting to school.
I'm getting a little bit silly as I'm thinking about a social story with a penis and a vagina,
Yes, right.
Like the thing you never thought you'd be creating as a parent, right? I mean, come
Exactly.
on.
Right.
But that's where we're at.
Yeah, yeah. And there are a lot of social stories online. You can Google them, and there's public and private. There's masturbation, which is one that lots of people feel they need, feel like I need to teach this because they're touching their sexual parts in a public place or something. So let's how do we teach the public private? There's nothing wrong with the behavior. Many people masturbate, some don't, but most do. And but you have to do it in a certain place. So yeah, I know, it's like, how did we get here? Yeah.
Crazy.
And I think the other thing, though, I just want to add one thing is sometimes parents also feel like, because of the disability, the cognitive ability or limitations, if, like you say, you don't like using the language, but like a mental age or something, they're cognitively sick. So let's just teach them what 6-year-olds need. And we really want to base it on the biological age of the child, not the, sort of not the word I'm looking for, not the mental age or cognitive age that people might use. So how you teach is different, but not necessarily what you teach. So an 18-year-old with or without a disability are going to need the same information for the most part. And then how you teach is going to be different. Not necessarily.
That is so profound. Seriously. I have so many fights with residential providers and the staff that they employ.
Yep.
To say that, yes, so-and-so is certainly a 25-year-old young man. And yes, you should be talking to him as a 25-year-old young man. However, this person they are not able to make their own decisions about everything. And so when you're saying, oh, I'm going to take so-and-so to a strip club, it's not necessarily the correct thing to do for this 25-year-old person. And it's not a values judgment. It's a judgment of whether they would really be able to understand and appreciate the environment, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to do everything just because somebody asks for it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's tricky. And I think depending on whether they have a guardian or not, that influences it as well. And so, sure.
It's a conversation. It's not well, they have a right to do whatever they want. Well, that's not true, because they don't have a right to hurt other people. They don't have a right to hurt themselves. They're under guardianship for a reason. And again, it's a conversation, or many conversations, and to talk about, well, why do you want to go there? Well, because I want to see blah blah blah. Well, maybe there's another way that we can do that, that's easier, not easier, what's the right word? See, I'm stumbling over my words, but that's more in your level of understanding. And especially with growing through this, like, it's not the first go-to to go to a strip club. It's like,
I know.
Let's build on this. Let's start here and let's build on this, And really, for that person, what it came down to was they wanted a girlfriend.
Right.
Well, you're not going to find a girlfriend in a strip club. Like, let's talk about other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, kind of getting underneath it, like what's the need that needs to be met? And it sounds like finding a partner was more of the need. And so what are ways you can do that? Because a strip club, that person is a helping professional and they're paid to dance, and they're not, they probably can't even be in a relationship with customers.
Right. And in exploring this, the lack of understanding of what that really was all about, what was going to happen there, what the place was like, what it was all about, what people do there, and that sort of thing. Just wasn't even a conversation. So,
right.
There are going to be other people for whom going to a strip club would be fine,
Right.
And part of their normal expression of themselves. But I think it's not a go-to, like, well, so-and-so asked for it because they saw it on the internet, or one of their care providers was talking about it in their home. And so now they thought, well, this is great. I want to go do that,
That's what we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's sort of, again, it's that individualized. Is this, tell me more about why you want to go to a strip club.
Right, exactly. Let's get to the understanding about what's going to happen there.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about the company Elevatus, and how that grew, and who do you serve now? Are you just in Massachusetts? Are you all over the country? Like, where are you serving people?
Well, I am in New Hampshire, and we used to do in particular our 3-day training. So these are special educators, developmental disability agency staff, some parents, some combination, sometimes self-advocates. And they're trained to go back to their community and lead classes and parent workshops and staff training. And we have had about 1,400 people go through the 3-day training. And really officially started where I was working full-time in this. And I have a colleague that was putting in full-time hours too. So 1,400 people all over the country, and probably about 80 of them outside of the country, mostly Canada, but other countries as well: New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, Japan, Chile. So lots of different people all around. And, since the pandemic, all of our trainings are online. And so we're getting more people from outside of the country. Now they have to wake up at 3 in the morning or something because of the time difference, but we are getting, someone came from Turkey. So it's really Russia. It's really nice to get that perspective in the training too. So
true.
Yeah.
So your train the trainer model is really helping to expand the training in, everywhere, basically.
Exactly.
Because they're taking it all back to their communities.
Yep. Yeah. And because it's such a need, as you know. And parents are looking for help. Staff don't know what to do.
Oh, yes.
And
absolutely.
Yeah, so yeah, having more training available to people, and I could run around the whole country and train everyone, but that's not realistic, right? So
Right.
more and more people to be comfortable training in this topic. So I
Oh,
think that's the
that's
kind of
great.
exciting thing for people when they come to the 3-day training is they're part of something bigger. This movement of more people learning how to lead these classes and
Mhm.
workshops and things. And it's kind of exciting to feel like you can have an impact.
100%. This
Yeah.
is very exciting. I'm so glad that we found out about you and certainly passed along this information to a lot of people. Um, I, I'm so glad to get to know you and thank you for what you do because this is not an easy subject and this is not an easy career path, but you have taken it on with such warmth and kindness and really in that person-centered way that is so important and missing sometimes.
Sure. And I do have some resources
I
on
was
my
just going to ask you about that.
Right. Yeah. So on my website, there's a resource page. I can also send you our resources for parents or professional, whichever one, or both, or if you wanted to just have those sort of our favorites
Mhm.
um, to share with
That would
people.
be great.
There's some
And
great,
we will post those in the show notes, folks, and
great.
all of Catherine's contact information so that you can go to the website, you can contact her if you have any questions. And I hope that all of you will consider bringing this training into your communities because
Mhm.
it is so important that we are talking about this and that we're just open and honest with one another.
Yeah. And, to one thing that people have said is they feel really nervous and about teaching and talking about this. And when they go back, they realize it's not as bad as they thought it was going to be. Um, we kind of think the worst, right? And there's so many positives to sexuality education, fuller lives, reduce abuse, reduce being charged with a sex crime, all these different things, and having these great connections and healthy
Yeah.
relationships. And the negative part is really about us.
Yeah.
We're uncomfortable, we blush, but the positive impact is so much, so much outweighs the negative. So I always say, like, I'd rather be a little uncomfortable and have someone have a full, happy, healthy life. Um,
And a deeper relationship, a more honest and truthful relationship with the people around them that support them, whether it's a
absolutely.
parent, a caregiver, guardian, their team, to be able to talk honestly and openly about all aspects of your life just builds that trust and that relationship in a new and meaningful way.
Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes.
Well,
Lots of
thank you so
positive.
much, Catherine. This was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
You bet.
And Catherine has agreed to do a Q&A for anybody that wants to come and join us in our circle of care. So we'll have a little note about that in our show notes as well. So I
Great.
look forward to seeing you again, and I'll see you in a bit.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank
Take
you.
care.